Good evening, everyone. Can I welcome everyone to tonight's council meeting. Please be seated. Before we move on to the items of business this evening, I need to update members of the equipment in the chamber tonight. The microphones are working, but the cameras are now defunct, which means that speakers will not appear live on the screens in front of you. Those of you who we already know will be speaking will have their photo shown on those screens. We can talk about how up-to-date they are later. From now on, the sound will be recorded by what's called for transparency purposes. We may have some other equipment another time to try out, but this is the one we're trying out tonight. As mentioned at the last meeting, we will be testing the use of electronic voting using an app on mobile devices. This way of voting will be trialled from item 7A. Can we have apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We've had apologies from Councillors Ahad, Allison, Hindmarsh, Anita Lower, Jackie Robinson, Councillor Stokell-Walker, Talbot, David Wood, Margaret Wood and Hall.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more apologies? No. Okay. Can we move on then to the minutes? Does the council agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of September 2000? Sorry, yes? Councillor Lovett. Yeah, it's on.
It was just on the minutes. I've been told that there's a general problem about this, but I did ask a question about the Safe Newcastle plan to Councillor Roman, but I don't seem to have received a reply about that. It was specifically to do with antisocial behaviour, and it was to do with the statement of intent and how the agencies were going to actually pay for that. I think.
Okay.
I know Councillor Roman said
sorry, then, Councillor Lovett, you're not then querying the minutes, you just haven't had a response from what was recorded. Okay, well, we can, if you would make contact again, then that would be a good reminder. Okay? So can we agree the minutes of September, 5th of September? Thank you. Item 3, official announcements. We start this evening with some sad announcements. On behalf of the Council, I would like to offer my condolences to the family and friends of former Lord Mayor, Alderman Margaret Carter. She passed away in September, sadly a day after our September meeting. It is also with regret that on behalf of the Council, with regret, I have to say that another former Lord Mayor, Alderman Peter Lang, died recently. And on behalf of the Council, I wish to offer sincere condolences to the family and friends of Alderman Lang. I will now ask Council and members of the public, please, to stand for 1 minute silence as a mark of respect for two former Lord Mayors who are both dedicated to the people of Newcastle and public service. Thank you. At this time of year, many parents throughout the city are beginning to think about gifts for their children to celebrate Christmas. As we are all corporate parents of our looked after children, may I invite you to put something towards Christmas gifts for our older children and young people this evening. It would mean a lot to them to get something from their parents, as most children do. And to help you, a collection envelope will be passed around the chamber. Thank you very much. This Sunday is Remembrance Sunday, and we are commemorating the centenary of the World War I armistice. I hope you can all join me in Old Alden Square as the city honours and pays attention to the fallen. If you cannot attend due to attending another service in your wards, that's understandable. Please take time to go and have a look at the wonderful display of woolen poppies donated from across the city and as far away as Australia. We have a sample of the craftsmanship in the chamber with us tonight, just below the Lord Mayor's chair, as you see. The display was set out by volunteers on Monday afternoon, and the occasion was posted on Facebook, and at noon today we've had 315,000 looks at that page. It's also been featured on Good Morning Britain this morning, and I believe the local BBC and ITV at lunchtime. Suggestions on what will happen to the display afterwards will be available on the website next week. Thank you to everyone who's been involved with the project. It's truly charming, and it's a humbling way to ensure that in Newcastle we will remember them. Do we have any correspondence? Item 4.
Yes, Lord Mayor, we'll have one item of correspondence which is included with the agenda papers.
Thank you.
It's a notice of motion, it's an item relating to the Discovery School.
All right. I would imagine that everyone has read their agenda papers and read this letter. Pardon? No, okay. Do we agree to receive that correspondence? Thank you. Item number 5, petitions. We have received 2 small petitions and one with over 2,500 local signatures this month. I would like first to invite Councillor Powers to present a petition regarding pavement parking on Heaton Park Road.
That's awful. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm presenting this petition on behalf of Space for Heaton. They're a local community group that are in my ward. The petition reads, paved parking on Heaton Park Road and surrounding areas puts people at risk and makes it hard to get around our community. People who walk, particularly those who use pushchairs and wheelchairs, find it hard to get around, and there's a risk of accidents as cars drive along pavements looking for a space. By preventing parking on pavements, the area will be much safer and will also be more pleasant to spend time in, which has clear benefits for both local businesses and the wider community, and it calls on the Council and other partners to help try and address this issue.
Thank you.
The signature has 322 local signatories, although many others have signed elsewhere as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Powers. I call on Councillor Ainsley to respond, please.
I completely understand and empathise with the issues raised by Councillor Powers in our petition.
Could you just hold on a second? Thank you, Councillor Forbes.
Thank you. While some might think it's a small, a small issue to park on the pavement, it absolutely is not. It blocks the pavements for people with buggies or in wheelchairs or, visually impaired people, and I think that people fail to realise the consequences. It's important to note, though, that there are different rules in different parts of the country and vastly different experiences of enforcement. Parking on the pavement is covered by both criminal and civil law, and while people in London must not park on the pavement, elsewhere in the country they should not. It's worth noting that local authorities are liaising with the Department of Transport to address this issue. This has been going on some considerable time, and I shall ask officers to look at this report to try to hurry things up. And a final note on this is that the pavement surfaces are not really designed to have cars parked on them, to carry the weight of the vehicle, and this adds unnecessarily to the maintenance costs of pavements. But I accept the petition, Councillor Powers, and I'll make sure we follow it through. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Do Council agree to receive the petition? Thank you. I will now invite Joe Kundal to present a petition in support of the proposals for the service provision at Fenham Library.
Thank you. Oh, it's a bit nerve-wracking. My petition is basically a pledge of support by members of the Fenham community and wider living in Newcastle. And it states that we support the plans to use Fenham Library as a wellness recovery hub for people recovering from drug and alcohol addiction. We believe these services are important. We believe in recovery through tailored support, and we know that people in our community will benefit from having these services locally. Whilst we hear that some people have felt it has been pushed through without proper consultation, we think the plans put forward are considered and sensible. We want to give voice to people who support the plans to counter those that have objected to it.
I call on Councillor McGuinness, the Cabinet Member, to respond, please.
Thank you. It is nerve-wracking. Thank you very much for your petition, and thank you for coming to take the time to present it. In Newcastle, we already know through Safer Newcastle that we have a higher than average rate of premature death because of drug and alcohol misuse. I can't tell you how committed we are in this city to doing something about this and to helping the most vulnerable in our society. The thing we must not do is make judgment or allow ourselves assumptions and misconceptions about what an addict is and how a person becomes a victim of addiction. There are often a wide range of personal, social and economic factors at play. Doing something about it means encouraging people to want to recover, providing safe places for treatment free of stigma so often associated with these illnesses. We currently do this at Plummer Court and Carlisle Square in the city centre, as well as at GP surgery. It means dealing with some of the other negative factors that can occur during addiction, such as homelessness and loneliness, providing support for families of those suffering because they suffer too, and then finally, providing a space in the community where active recovery can be continued alongside daily activities to help people make sure they don't go back. That last bit, that crucial piece of the jigsaw, is what this service in Fenham is. It's a space where people can recover, can come to access things they need to make sure they sustain their journey. They can come with their families and their friends, they can attend meetings and one-to-one therapy, and they can take exercise and learn new skills. It's a library with a pool, an allotment and a doctor's surgery and a park, all surrounding, which strengthens that sense of community and access to things that sustain people. This is a whole life approach to supporting recovery, and the library is the perfect location for it, particularly given the aspirations to expand the health and wellbeing services delivered here and to further bring together the facilities. Libraries are there for everybody. They're an equaliser, giving access to information, knowledge and learning for everybody from every background. They tackle loneliness and social isolation and are at the heart of the community. These values are complementary and furthermore, the provision of this service in Fenham saves and expands a well-used and much-loved library service. Recovery service users tell us they want to recover in their communities, away from stigma and in spaces that welcome their families and friends. That's what this service is about. So the last few months, a lot of focus has been given to the perceived problems with delivering this service in Fenham Library and the residents that are opposed. But I want to take time to say that I know myself and officers have received a huge number of supportive communications, as well as a large response to the consultation in the surrounding area. In addition, we've heard from the police, Dr Guy Pilkington, who's the chair of the local CCG and local GP, who has extensive experience of patients with drug and alcohol problems, the NHS, Safe Newcastle, and Professor Gilvary, a national expert and senior local consultant psychiatrist. The local GP, surgery and others, all endorsing this service and vouching for its safety and praising the delivery model. I firmly believe that the reality will be that people will notice the improvement to the building in Fenham Library. They'll notice the addition of a lovely cafe that everyone can use. They'll notice the additional opening hours and possibly more people in Lycra using the facilities for therapeutic exercise. This is a busy, thriving library at the heart of the community. That's what it's always been, and that's what it will continue to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Condor. Does Council agree to receive the petition? Thank you. The final petition has more than 2,500 local signatures and is therefore the subject of a time-limited debate at full council. The procedure is that the presenter will have 5 minutes to present their petition, and then there is scope for council to debate the matter for up to 15 minutes. And in order to keep to the time limit, each member's contribution is limited to a maximum of 3 minutes, including the cabinet member and the seconder, and 2 opposition members. I now call on Claire Dimambro to present the petition from Fenham Library Action Group.
Good evening. Actions supporting health and well-being across the wards of Fenham and Wingrove is recognised as a priority, and as residents we actively support and welcome services that are fully inclusive of the community and offering a wide range of opportunities to all. However, at the end of August, many residents became aware for the very first time that the hub was going to be used for the purposes of drug and alcohol recovery. The gym would be on prescription and the actual footprint of the library service would shrink by approximately 90%, something that's been known to members of the council for some time, not communicated to us. Amongst other public bodies, Libraries as a statutory service published guidance in 2015 stating that when libraries are considering changing their service, they should demonstrate a plan to consult with local communities alongside an assessment of their needs, which has not happened. As you are aware, the council staff have acknowledged the lack of consultation and offered a token apology. We have formally requested that the implementation of this is halted so that consultation with residents could take place, and our own MP has asked for the halt of the project and an impact assessment to be undertaken. In the last few weeks, there were 4 workshops held. This is a token attempt to pacify us, offering the ability to shape the service on offer. Sadly, the shameful attempt to belatedly tick the box has been met with astonishment from us all. Having been repeatedly told that the implementation of the drug and alcohol recovery service is a done deal, despite feedback by council staff and key councillors, demonstrates a lack of democracy, a lack of respect for residents and a lack of integrity from councillors and staff managing the project, and will result in lasting damage to the relationship between Newcastle Council, its councillors and residents within the wards of Fenham and Wingrove. We have asked questions to seek to understand the rationale behind decision making. To our horror, the only criteria being used to assess the appropriateness of Fenham Library as the right location is a funding grant that was originally allocated in 2015 and is under the threat of removal. No other fact-based evidence has been used in the assessment of this location, and no evidence of a credible risk or impact assessment has been shared. We are passionate about what services are offered out of the library. It represents the last safe place available to local residents. For example, in August this year, there were 5 violent and sexual offences in Nunsmoor Park area, meaning we have nowhere else safe to take our children. We've been informed that the implementation of services into Fenham Library secures a community asset, that anecdotally 25% of drug and alcohol addiction is from Fenham. It's projected up to 400 people a week will attend the services, but the actual reality is the library is a community-based asset of which 40% of residents across both wards use.
I'd like to bring your attention to a direct quote from Nick Poole, who spoke at the August Labour Party conference 3 months ago in Liverpool. This is what he said. A modern library is a common room at the heart of the community, supporting learning, health and well-being, and helping people get online. It brings people together of all ages and faiths. It overcomes loneliness and social isolation in every town, city and village, the length and breadth of our nation. He goes on to say, how a civilized nation treats its libraries is a barometer of how it values its citizens. And in today's Britain, a Britain of austerity and inequality, we should be outraged by how our libraries are being treated. So our Labour Council, they claim to say a library, how they can say a library is at the heart of our community, and then show a total disregard for the library itself and the views of the local people by failing to consult, communicate, engage and involve the community is a total contradiction. The elderly and young vulnerable members of our community who have spoken to us in Fenham and who have signed the petition in their thousands are against the plans, and in particular the location of the Drug and Alcohol Rehab Centre. They feel let down and disappointed by our Labour councillors. The main focus of the new proposals for the Fenham Library is primarily focused on a very, very small minority group. We recognise this service is vital, but we believe it is placed in the wrong location. It concerns us there are 6 schools within a quarter-of-a-mile radius from the library. Many young children have to walk past the library on their daily commute to and from school independently, and parents rightly are scared of what type of people this facility will attract and expose their children to. The council should be protecting the most vulnerable people of our community, and without risk and impact assessments, how can they say they've done this? How Fenham Library has been deemed to be the most appropriate building city-wide for this facility astonishes most. Let Newcastle be the city of literacy and empowerment. Let it lay the foundation for a better future for generations to come. Support our libraries to create a fair, equal and democratic society that works not just for the few, not just for the many, but for absolutely everybody. We urge you to reconsider this facility being opened in the heart of our local community and welcome your support to overturn this decision. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Cabinet Member Councillor McGuinness to respond, please.
I'd like to thank you for your petition and say first and foremost that we are wholeheartedly aware of the strength and depth of feeling and concern about the opening of this service. And whilst planning protocols were clearly followed, we recognise that a fuller consultation of the public health aspects of this service should have been carried out. We're sorry that this did not happen, and if we could start again with this, we absolutely would do things differently. But we're listening and we're consulting with residents on shaping the design and delivery of this service. In response to the petition, I'd like to propose the following actions, which we've started to do because we've been talking about this now for quite some time. We've paused the opening of the drug and alcohol recovery aspects of the service in Fenham Library, where we continue to consult with residents and experts on the way that this service should be delivered. This will also ensure that concerns raised by residents are considered by the Adult and Children's Safeguarding Boards on the 15th and the 28th of this month. In response to a local reaction, we have also established and will continue to work with a stakeholder group to monitor the service and any impact it might have on the community. This group will include police, local GP services, foodworks, specialist treatment services, props who support families who are suffering from addiction, libraries, public health, Safe Newcastle representatives. The schools have also been invited and the doors remain open for them should they wish to join. And going forward, we'll begin to include the Fenham Association of Residents, community groups and community representatives too. Some things I want to make very, very clear about this service. This is a therapeutic service for people who are in recovery from drug and alcohol dependency. The kind of thing that they'll be tapping into will be one-to-one counselling, 12-step programs, CV writing sessions, yoga and gym sessions, training on food and cooking. These are things that, in my view, complement the services of a library, which is there for literary excellence, to tackle social isolation and to provide a place where everybody is equal in their ability to access information and resources regardless of their background. This is a non-clinical service. There will be no pharmacy and there will be no needle exchange. Fenham Library will gain a cafe that anyone can use. That's operated by Foodworks to provide training and employment opportunities for young people who need them. Fenham Library will be open longer with greater access to computers, and Fenham Library will have an enhanced book collection, improving what already exists in this busy, well-used community facility. This council has sustained deep and damaging cuts imposed by this Tory government, and our libraries have suffered. This will save the library and will enhance it and will give greater purpose, and that cannot be a bad thing. The petition talks about how our decisions are financially motivated, and we did receive money from Public Health England for the establishment and sustainability of the service, but the choice of Fenham is about a lot more than that. As I said before, people in recovery tell us that they want to recover in the community, to have the opportunity to continue their journey in the community, and that a place like this makes it more successful. The west end of the city, NE4 and NE5 postcodes house around 22% of the service users we're talking about. And in addition, its proximity to the pool and who are supportive, and the doctors who are supportive, and the allotments make Fenham a great location for this. Public safety is of paramount concern, but I'm assured by the police, the NHS and Safe Newcastle, all of whom have openly said that they perceive no increased risk from this user group, and the police have said that this service would likely enhance their relationship. Finally, I do not want any of this discussion here this evening to detract from the most important thing. The people that use this therapeutic service in Fenham are our mums, they're our dads, they're our brothers, they are our sisters, they are our friends and neighbours. They're at the shops, they're at the school gates, they're in the libraries, and they're in our lives because they're normal people who have had a problem and they've sought help. We cannot put these strong individuals in a box and say we don't want them in our communities. Whilst we'll do everything in our power to make sure everyone's happy and comfortable, we can't turn our backs on the vulnerable. This is a proud, welcoming, friendly city, a city of sanctuary, and these residents need this service. I propose that we accept this petition and approve the actions that I've outlined this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGuinness. Yeah, okay. Can I call on Councillor Shadwell who wants to second the proposal outlined by the Cabinet Member?
Thank you. As a Wingrove councillor, I'd like to thank all the local residents who've signed both the petitions and made their voices heard. Over the past months, I've attended the public meetings, community drop-in sessions, and listened in our surgery. The strength of local feeling about the library redevelopment is very clear. I share your frustration about the planning process and the level of consultation, and empathise with the anger that many are feeling. However, I'm also saddened by the confusion, misconception and fear that has spread about both the service and about the nature of recovery. The petition cites Fenham Library as being turned into a rehabilitation centre for individuals with drug and alcohol addiction. This isn't the case. The library will be preserved and improved, including extending opening hours. In addition, the building will include a non-clinical, non-prescribing drug and alcohol service for people already stabilised after clinical treatment at city centre locations and at the later stages of recovery. So this isn't a rehab centre. This is a service for those in recovery and their families, not those in active addiction. Stopping using substances is only one part of recovery. After losing so much, many things need rebuilding to enable people to lead fulfilling lives. So examples of these types of wellbeing services include counselling, mindfulness, cookery, art classes, gym sessions and confidence building. Referrals are by key workers who regularly carry out individual risk assessments. The largest part of the building is a community space containing the new cafe and library. As a local councillor, I'd like to see this space fully used for the benefit of everybody, and recent drop-in sessions have started to discuss how we can better work together to develop this as a community asset. One of the main concerns of the petition is that despite this being an essential service, it's in the wrong location. However, as one resident points out, you either believe in the service or you don't. Another says, if we consider this a valuable service, then we should welcome it in our community. I believe this is a valuable service, and I believe in the preciousness of recovery for the individual, their families, local communities and wider society. Placing the service within the community does not mean that the needs of some citizens are being prioritised over the safeguarding of others. The client group do not pose an increased risk to children, young people or the elderly in the area. It's been worrying to hear that some residents are now afraid to use the library and feel that the friendly atmosphere of the community will be disruptive. So we will continue to assure local residents that the library is a safe and inclusive place. It's also been worrying to hear that some residents are fearful to visit the library in case people think they're in recovery themselves. However, this importantly reminds us that those in recovery are indeed indistinguishable from everybody else. They're part of the community and should be able to access these services without stigma or discrimination. As another resident states, deciding others are a threat long before you've encountered them only breeds unnecessary hate, and there's too much of that already. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shadwell. I have two members of council who have asked to speak about this petition. So can I call first on Councillor Wendy Taylor, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I do accept the importance of the recovery service as described by Councillor McGuinness and Councillor Shatwell, but this type of service can only work if the community is involved and supported in its implementation right from the beginning. And this is where the residents of Fenham have been so badly let down by the council on this issue due to a lack of openness and a lack of proper consultation. I can understand that there was a concern at the prospect of losing the government grant for the recovery unit if no progress could be made. I also know there was a threat to the viability of Fenham Library due to the withdrawal of the YHN from the building, and obviously it seemed like a good solution to put the recovery unit in the library building. However, the failure to have any meaningful consultation with local people was disgraceful and totally unacceptable, and other possible uses for the building should have been fully considered. When the council gained planning permission for the health and wellbeing hub housed in Fenham Library, they failed to mention to local residents that part of the hub would be for recovery, and when questioned about this, stated they did not need to provide an impact assessment or consult with residents, as the client group using the hub would be considered low risk. Obviously, this has upset many residents in the area, and indeed outside the area, and has also caused concern to local schools such as Sacred Heart and Dame Allen's, and the planned loss of allotments is also a concern. At the belated public meeting to discuss the issue on the 22nd of October, residents were told there were still no plans for consultation and that the unit would be going ahead in spite of residents' concerns. As a result, the council was seen as arrogant and uncaring. It may be that the scheme can bring money into the area for the swimming pool and other services, but if residents are too concerned to use the library or any other community services in the building, that money could be wasted. And from the description of the size of the residual library, I think it will be difficult for people to use it anyway. I'm told that there's about 3 shelves of space. I urge the Cabinet member to work with residents and to ensure that there's a full risk assessment carried out, covering all the safeguarding issues that are causing concern, and that every effort is made to ensure all residents can make use of any improved facilities. I do welcome the commitments made by Councillor McGuinness, but it's too little, too late.
Councillor Huddard, you indicated a wish to speak.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I have to declare an interest here. I've worked in substance misuse for more years than I'd admit in public. I've worked in the statutory service, the voluntary service, in prisons and the communities, with these people and their relatives, everybody who's affected by drugs and alcohol. And I will do anything to support measures to help those people and their families get efficient and effective interventions. However, most treatment services, and you did mention treatment, Councillor McGuinness, are established in buildings outside of town centres and main thoroughfares. These are to enable thorough assessments and to be set well away from previous contracts, temptations, and they are often, as a result of the legal case, that'll be associated with it, hundreds of miles away from their previous contacts. And once service users are stable, then the process to extend rehabilitation, daily living, social skills, training, etc., comes along with the reintroduction into the community. We don't know if this is the situation here. Now, I have seen many of these facilities all over the country. I've never seen one in a library. But that might be new to me. And I am concerned at how the various options for suitable accommodation were decided by the Health Trust, the police, the safeguarding services, etc. Are you telling me there was nowhere else within the Health Trust for this kind of facility? I'd also question the nature of the consultation. It was clearly inadequate. If you want to improve the library, why didn't you improve the library anyway? We've had to work to improve Jesmond Library and High Heaton Library by our own efforts. As local councillors, we did that to save them from your closures. I listened to Councillor McGuinness' speech, which did sound to me like you're closing the stable door after the horse has bolted. Good enough.
Thank you. I call on Councillor McGuinness to respond to the debate, please.
I actually don't even really know what to say to a lot of that. In response to Councillor Taylor, I couldn't have been clearer in the apology about the lack of consultation up front. I could not have been clearer today. And everything that we're doing now to move forward is to work with residents, to engage residents in this process so that this community facility remains that, and this is delivered alongside a library service. And as for what Councillor Haddad says, you know, all of those years in drug and alcohol recovery service should tell you that these people are members of our community. They are in our community. As I said before, there are mums, our dads, our sisters, our brothers, and we don't need to make political points about moving them far away from cities because that is not where they belong. They belong at home, and that's where this is. It's at home. And so I would urge everybody to just accept the actions that we're already taking. We will continue to engage more and more residents as we go along, and I'm looking forward to seeing an active, happy, healthy library service in Fenham.
Can I just ask a question then, please? Does Council agree to deal with the petition as proposed by the Cabinet Member? Well, nobody said anything? Okay. Okay, then if you need to speak up. If you don't just shake your head. I mean, okay. If you're not agreeing, then we need to go to the vote, and this one will be on the old voting system. Old voting system, please. It's the old voting, the existing voting system through your buttons by your side. I'm being advised that we will cut out the lights there. We'll start again. There seems to be something happening that's not right.
Can I just have a point of clarification on this? Are we voting now to accept the petition or otherwise? Because it would appear that by voting against, the party opposite is saying they're not going to accept the petition. Is that right? No. Can we have some clarification?
Sorry, the legal officer's asked to clarify it for you.
Lord Mayor, we're voting on what was proposed by Councillor McGuinness. I think it might be useful if Councillor McGuinness restated how she proposed to deal with the petition, just so that all members are clear as to what they're actually voting on.
So I propose that we accept the petition and the actions that I outlined in the response, please.
How can that be?
And Councillor McGuinness, could you actually reiterate the actions that you said at the outset, just so I think that all members are clear about what they're voting
no worries.
on?
They have paused the opening and the drug and alcohol recovery aspect of the service in Fenham while we continue to consult with residents, experts and the way in which this service is delivered. We will also ensure that concerns raised by residents are considered by the Adults and Children's Safeguarding Board on the 15th and the 28th of this month. And in response to local reaction, we've established and will continue to work with a stakeholder group to monitor the service and any impact it might have on communities. And I can go into the list of all the people included in that stakeholder group, but it's a wide section of experts, and we'll go on to include members of the community and community groups.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, members of the community.
So, Lord Mayor, Council is now going to vote on the actions that were proposed by Councillor McGuinness.
And to accept.
That's already covered.
So this excludes the petition.
No,
You turned it on. That's what I'm trying to ask for.
Well, I'm not sure we are. How can you accept the petition and then not go with it?
We can accept the petition, we can take the petition, and that's physical. So then that's what we're doing in relation to the petition, and that's what she's proposed to do. That's why it's come to us.
Why can't you do it in two parts?
Because you can't, because that's what this
Excuse my delay in all this, but I'm just getting clarification from the legal officer. The situation is that the proposal is to accept the petition and then to discuss further and engage more with the community about the proposals. According to standing orders and the legal officer, that is the way it is going, but my brain is not so brilliant at that because, anyway, I won't give my view. I'm an impartial chairperson. Councillor Cott.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, for that clarification. I'm sure the opposition is very happy to accept the petition being presented. However, we are not happy with the actions that have been discussed. Yes. Is there a possibility of a vote? I would be interested in your guidance on this, of separating these two things out. We do not want to be in a situation where the petition is not formally accepted by the council, but we have some great concerns about the actions of the as outlined by the cabinet member. Thank you very much.
Lord Mayor, I think it's clear from what is being said that nobody in the Chamber is actually disagreeing with the proposal to accept the petition. It is simply the actions which are being proposed by the Cabinet Member in response to the petition. And I think on that basis, if we can now take the vote. On the actions that are being proposed by Councillor McGuinness.
Can I have some clarity on what the communication with the residents is going to be? Are we allowed to ask that question?
I still can't understand that. Truly don't. The logic does not go with it.
Councillor McGuinness has outlined the steps, and I mean, if there is any uncertainty, I'm sure Councillor McGuinness could reiterate them. But
can you clarify to me exactly how you're going to communicate with the residents now? Because up to this point, you haven't really done that.
I mean, Councillor McGuinness has set out the actions, and they were. Councillor McGuinness, do you wish to summarise what they were?
I've done.
No, you haven't. Thank you. I didn't invite the meeting. None of the residents have. You've just involved stakeholders. You haven't involved us.
I'm happy to take the vote.
And there's over 3,000 people who don't agree with it. Over 3,000 residents like you haven't consulted.
Right, is she going to say anything?
It's in our community. It's not
Is she going to say anything?
Have you got a note of what it is? Have you got? Yeah. Can you not see the logic? I can see the logic. What?
No.
No. Can you just?
Petitions keep changing at meeting last month.
Oh. I mean, I think the actions have been outlined to the council chamber, and I think the matter is being called for a vote. So I propose we, yes. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay. So if we move to the vote now, Lord Mayor.
Yep, okay then. Please move to the vote. Those who are in favour with accepting the petition and the proposals outlined by the Cabinet Member.
It's not working. The problem is that the voting pads are not working.
No, this is, you mean your buttons by your...
The buttons are not working.
Okay.
Can you reset the vote?
Brilliant. Yes.
Show of hands.
We can do it by show of hands or alphabetical.
Otherwise, those who are in favour stand up. And...
It's voting. It's working. I think it's working.
Remember, councillors should represent the people that fought for them.
No safeguarding. You're not going to be getting any votes from Fenham, that's for sure.
Quiet, please, up in the gallery. Thank you. Councillor Avery, what is it? Well, if you just put your hand up, we'll put the number. Okay.
Lord Mayor, I would point out that the actual majority that is showing there is sufficient to actually determine the vote. So I think the matter is concluded because the proposals outlined by Councillor McGuinness have been the subject of a majority vote, and that concludes the item.
Okay. So that is agreed.
I haven't said it.
I do apologise for being hazy, but it may be my age, the way that worked out. Item number 6, public question time. We've received no requests for public questions or addresses to Council this month. And we're just going to wait until the members of the public in the gallery are leaving. Okay, thank you. We move on to item 7A, reports referred from Cabinet and Committee. Mid-year Treasury Management Review. I call on Councillor Dunn to move the report, seconded by Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This is a report that was considered by Cabinet last month and is referred to Council with a recommendation from Cabinet that the recommendation be agreed. Thank you.
Councillor McCarthy. And reserve the right to speak? No, okay, thank you. Normal rules of debate apply. No more than 6 members shall be permitted to speak in addition to the mover and seconder. And then Councillor Dunn has the right to reply if there have been any other speakers. The seconder may reserve the right to speak later, but she has foregone that one. I have an indication that Councillor Ashby wishes to speak to this item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And may I also extend thanks to officers for the report and their work. I recognise from previous activity on the Audit Committee the professionalism that they bring to bear. But I would like to pick up on the phrase prudential borrowing, the definition which I've been trying to pursue, And it seems to me that any borrowing that isn't prudential is reckless, and so why do we have any reckless borrowing? I doubt it, so why don't we just call it borrowing? In respect of interest rates, do we get the lowest rates amongst local authorities? Is it just an urban myth that Sunderland Council can get low rates because of its association with the Fire Authority? And will being part of the North Tyne Authority help us with this? In section 4.2 of the report, it is noted that overall borrowings are set to top 700 million by March, subject to any further changes in the level of planned capital expenditure. Since CapEx is a medium to long-term activity, it's just a hint that there's something in the wings we haven't been told about, and if so, can we be told now? And I also note that in section 4.3, that over the present year, the balance of repayables is swinging significantly from short-term, under 1 year, to long-term, over 10 years borrowings. And what's the difference in the interest rates between these two durations? And of course, I recognise that if Councillor Dunn doesn't have the data to hand, perhaps officers can supply it later.
Thank you, Councillor Ashby. I now call on Councillor Dunn to reply, please.
Well, that sounds like a plan. I will make sure that Councillor Ashby gets a reply to his questions. In the meantime, Cabinet has considered the report, wasn't made aware that there were any of these queries by representatives of the group opposite at Cabinet, so unfortunately I can't answer those questions tonight, but the recommendation is that the report and the recommendations be agreed and that we implement the proposed way of working.
Thank you. Does Council agree the recommendations? Can we test the new way of voting, please? Well, we've been asked just to test it, please. So, we've taken the decision, but we can now ask all members to vote on your devices, please. That's what I've been asked to say. We want to see if this works for future agenda items tonight. We haven't got enough votes put in yet. Yeah. Can I just ask for each of you, have you seen on the screen that your vote is registered, please? Yeah, I'm just asking if everyone can see that. Okay. Is there anyone who's unable to see that the highlighted box? Okay. Thank you for your patience while your colleagues are just having things checked on their device. Thank you. Yeah, well, they're just doing that over there. Okay, are we there? Yep. Okay, thank you. Well, the recommendations in the report have been agreed. Thank you. Okay. So item 7B, financial regulations. I call upon Councillor Dunn to move the report, seconded by Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The Newcastle Charter requires us to regularly review and update the Council's financial regulations. The changes are fully set out in paragraph 4 of the report, and I would move them and ask that City Council agree the proposed changes.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn. Councillor McCarthy.
I formally second that, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Pardon? Yeah. Does Council agree the recommendations of the report? Thank you. Item 7C, Pay Policy Statement 2019-2020. I call upon Councillor Powers to move the report, seconded by Councillor Hazel Stevenson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This report's already been to Constitutional Committee for discussion. It sets out our pay policy for the upcoming year. It's a fairly standard item on the agenda. I just want to pay particular regard to our current continuing closing of the gap between the gender pay inequality within the Council, and also just to remind colleagues about the excellent work we did in the Newcastle living wage, which we started back in 2012, really trailblazing the way for the living wage across the rest of the country. I understand we'll be making an announcement during the coming days on during Living Wage Fortnight around the Council's position on the newly announced living wage by the Living Wage Foundation. I move, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Formally seconded.
Again, the normal rules of debate apply, no more than 6 members. I call upon Councillor Ferguson, who's indicated a wish to speak to this report.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This report on Council's pay policy is well timed, with the People's Budget consultation ongoing. I've noticed with interest many residents are expressing a view on this particular topic in front of us in the free text comments that they're able to make, and it's unfortunate that in the tool they can't address it directly. They're forced to use a crude hatchet rather than a fine scalpel to make forced decisions in a fake environment. Perhaps this is a feature, not a bug, in the tool, designed to promote Cabinet's particular narrative on the subject, which we will no doubt hear more about this evening. But, no matter, residents' views are broadly clear on the subject in front of us. Whilst there is, rightly, restraint on elected members' remuneration in line with public opinion, we don't see the same thing for senior officers' pay. Would Councillor Powers agree that it's high time for the Council to act as a trailblazer for their national leaders' policy on the subject and formally include rank-and-file staff in the remuneration decisions for senior officers? Or are they content with the median wage for Council staff hovering at less than 15% of the Chief Executives? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Ashby.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It seems that the median salary across Newcastle City Council is £3,000 lower than across the region. I'd be interested to know, is this because we're a poor payer, or because we have more younger, less experienced people on our payroll, or we have a higher proportion of low-paid women? Why is this? The report also highlights salary sacrifice as a reason for lower pay, or at least as stated in the report. If it is significant, the impact should be stated, and if it isn't, it shouldn't be used to confuse the issue. Market supplements are highlighted only in the case of one senior officer. It would be useful to know, particularly in the light of the explanation within the report, if they are currently being paid in any other cases. Councillor Ferguson has mentioned the Chief Executive pay, but it's clear that in addition to that scale, that other payments are made for other roles. What's the mechanism for approving other part-time jobs, and what assessment is made of the impact of them on the full-time job as our Chief Executive? I note with great interest that in the top quartile and the lower middle quartile of the statutory reportable information, women represent over 50% of each of those groups. And for the drafter, on page 12 of the statement, in the fourth paragraph, the word case seems to be missing after the business, and the click-through to mandatory gender pay gap reporting on page 11 and at the bottom of Appendix 2 don't seem to be working.
Thank you, Councillor Dunn. Councillor Dunn, I do apologise. Start again. Councillor Powers.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm glad that Councillor Fergus got to his question in the end. I was a little bit confused what the budget simulator had to do with the pay policy statement. Regarding the specific questions around the pay that is awarded to the Chief Executive, perhaps he could refer his question to his own Deputy Leader, who was part of the appraisal panel that made a decision on that pay award. We have a robust system that is in place in how all staff are appraised and ones for the Chief Executives as well, to ensure that they are delivering against their set goals and targets and being held accountable, and ensuring that their performance is reflected in the pay that they receive. Regarding our status, you know, we have, I think, I can't remember, it's 1 in 14 or 1 in 15, a pay differential between the lowest paid staff and the highest paid in our staff. That is well below the 1 in 26 that exists within the wider public sector, and the 1 in 262 that exists in the private sector. So I think as an organisation we are getting quite good value for money, and how we pay our staff and the different levels that we pay our staff. In terms of the wider questions that Councillor Ashby asked, certainly why is there a mean average gap? I'll put that to officers and then try and get a response back to him. That second question was incredibly detailed that I wouldn't have a clue where to start answering it. It's much more appropriate to be answered by an officer who can give you the full detail. I couldn't quite follow everything you were saying, Councillor Ashby. I apologise. So may I ask that you put it in an email and we can share it around to all councillors in response. The spelling mistake, colleagues, please note that, and it will be corrected. And the links, I'm not aware that links don't work, so we'll undertake to ensure that those are updated to make sure that they're correct as well. That's everything, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. Does Council agree with the recommendations? Thank you. Item 7D, Walsington Parish Council Community Governance Review. I call again on Councillor Powers to move the report, seconded by Councillor Hazel Stevenson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Again, this has been discussed through Constitutional Committee. We've undertaken a boundary review for the Parish Council at the Council's own request. It was a desk-based review. It was fairly light touch. The areas that are moving in are just fields at the moment. It was very difficult to consult with anybody, although we did undertake to try and consult as everybody that would be affected as possible, including the developers, which is all set out in the report. So there's some minor changes there, some changes just for Council to consider, and I move it for Council to hopefully accept.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Formally second the report.
Thank you. Does Council agree with the recommendations? Item 7E, Gambling Statement on Principles. I will call on Councillor Kemp to move the report, seconded by Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The Licensing Authority is required to prepare and publish a revised Statement of Principles every 3 years. The new Statement of Principles will be implemented in 2019 and last until 2022. The reviewed document has been produced in conjunction with guidance issued by the Gambling Commission and with regard to social responsibility codes of practice which gambling operators must adhere to. Council should note that all costs for providing a service in respect of gambling are recovered by fees set by the Council and paid by the applicants and officers. Consultation was commenced on the 12th of June this year and finished on the 27th of July. Of the 3 responses received, 2 were from trade bodies and 1 from a licensed gambling operator. The views of these responses have been incorporated, where appropriate, into this new statement. For Council, key points of note and amendments to the policy are as follows. The inclusion of enhanced information detailing the expectations of the licensing authority with regard to the protection of children and vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. It's acknowledged and documented that the views of the Director of Public Health are sought on licensing applications. The incorporation of procedures for enforcement work and seizures of illegal gambling machines. This is to reflect a positive enforcement approach following successful legal actions of the authority in 2017. In addition, reference is made to the confirmation that central government will reduce the maximum stakes on high-stake gaming machines available in betting shops from £100 to £2 per spin. It is clear, though, that this Tory government puts the concerns of the Treasury above the welfare of vulnerable people, with the delays of this being put back until October 2019. Council failure to comply with the statutory requirement to review the statement of principles which could result in legal challenge which, if successful, could incur legal costs against this authority. I recommend that the City Council adopts this statement of principle which will be implemented on January the 31st, 2019.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Dunn.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As Councillor Kemp said, it's a statutory requirement, so I formally second the proposed recommendations in the report.
Thank you. I've had one member of Council wishing to speak to this item. I call on Councillor Stone. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you to Councillor Kemp for the report. This has clearly been in the news quite a bit recently, and if I could ask a couple of questions in relation to into the statement. On FOBTs or FOBTs, could you advise whether there has been any representations made by the Council to our MPs to take this up with government, because this has clearly been something that's been debated and determined by the government in recent days. The second question was with regard to the Council's own policy on advertising of gambling. Now, we know that the Council has a number of display screens around the city. I was wondering if you could confirm that the Council's policy is not to allow gambling advertisements on those screens. And finally, I was asking Councillor Kemp if he can comment with regard to the impact of betting shops on the health of our high streets. I mean, this is something that I think is infecting the vitality of some of our high streets, the proliferation of betting shops, and I think it would be something useful if the Cabinet Member could comment on that. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Stone. Councillor Beecham.
My Lord Mayor, in my day job, I've spent some time discussing the awful problems of fixed odds betting terminals, which have been referred to this evening and are also referred to on page 137 in the papers before us tonight. Not only are these places where a great deal of money is lost by people who can afford it, they're also places which are the scenes of much violence. They are the most violent part of industry of any kind in this country. It's disgraceful that the government, having accepted the recommendation very properly to reduce the betting limit to £2, are now deferring the implementation of that very important decision until the autumn, presumably on the basis that it will raise something like £1 billion worth of tax for the government. And can't move, I suspect, that the Council makes representations to the government about this, but I hope that it will do so. The leader, I believe, will, I'm sure, have the support across the chamber for sending a strong letter to the government insisting upon the government implementing the policy forthwith as originally devised.
Thank you, Councillor Beecham. I now call on Councillor Kemp to reply.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Stone, I am aware that a number of the local members have made representations to government on this particular issue, and I'm sure we would all support them in that campaign. With regards to the gambling advertising, no, it is not allowed within the city, and we have a clear focus on that. With a view as to the damage and detrimental impact it has on district hearts and local communities, I'm very clear. Unfortunately, we're restricted within the actions that we can take through the planning and licensing guidelines, but obviously the licensing statement of principles and also our planning guidance is something that we need to focus on, and it's about the impact, and certainly the emphasis in the new statement of principles addresses those key points. It's actually about the welfare, it's about the vulnerability of individuals, and it's about the fact that a number of these institutions do prey on the most vulnerable, and with the current regime of austerity that's pressing people into most desperate measures, I think these locations are becoming probably more attractive to people in measures of desperation, and I think we must do everything we can to strike them away, and that will go along with institutions such as Bright House and all those other rogue traders. Councillor Beecham, I concur entirely, and we will agree. I hope that if Council agrees that both myself as Cabinet Member and Nick Forbes as Leader of Council would write representation into government on this measure.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Does Council agree the recommendations? Thank you. Item number 8, questions to members. We have received 6 questions for written reply, and these have been circulated in the Council chamber. Item 9, Cabinet Member Reports. I call on the Leader of Council, Councillor Forbes, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Firstly, that picture is rather old. Sadly, I no longer look like that. And secondly, as you can probably tell, I'm losing my voice. I gather a number of members are probably rather pleased about that. So I'll be brief in my introduction and hopefully brief in my replies to the questions too. This is the first report structured around the Council's new 5 priority areas. And what I've sought to do in introducing those 5 new priority themes for the Council is make it easier for members to make a read across between portfolio holders and the Council's reporting system. And inevitably, my report will be, as other Cabinet members' reports are, about highlights rather than detail, but the detail can often be found in the quarterly performance monitoring reports which are presented to Cabinet. And I would encourage all members to look at those. I know Scrutiny certainly do. And the other thing which I know will please a number of members is that I have set a new strict page limit of 10 pages for Cabinet members' reports. I've had a number of Cabinet members making representations to say they couldn't possibly do that. So I said I would set the bar by making sure that mine was limited to 10 pages. And so it is. 2 things to particularly comment on, Lord Mayor, before I open it up for questions. Firstly, we've seen significant progress in the journey towards devolution. Tomorrow will the first meeting of the Newcastle, Northumberland and North Tyneside Combined Authority will take place. This is a significant step forward in bringing powers and responsibilities into our region from central government in Whitehall. And hopefully the journey will not stop here. We're all ambitious for further devolution, and this, for the first time, gives us a combined authority structure which enables us not only to deliver on the first deal, but access the kind of resources that government have hinted will be coming our way in the future. And secondly, Lord Mayor, I was very proud and pleased that we were able to host the first ever Convention of the North meeting, which was the biggest gathering of political, business, civic and faith leaders across the North back in September that has ever met. And the purpose of that was to start a new conversation across the North, to turn around this idea that somehow we're always being portrayed as being in decline and having to get on a train and go to London to ask for things. The aim is to create a strong, united voice for the North. We debated and discussed on the day important policy issues like transport, skills, devolution and the impact of Brexit. And crucially, the conversation developed very strongly, not just being about economic growth in the North, but it developed into a conversation about the kind of culture and society we want for the North too. And the report for that event, Lord Mayor, will be available for the members to read shortly. With that, Lord Mayor, I'm happy to take comments and questions.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Can I call upon Councillor Chisholm, who has asked to ask a question? Thank you.
Lord Mayor. So after 8 years of Conservative and mostly Liberal Democrat government, the United Nations have appointed a special rapporteur to look into rising hardship and deprivation in this country. And I know that the rapporteur visited Newcastle, I think it was today. I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about that.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor Cott.
Very much, Lord Mayor, and thanks to the Leader for his report and the amicable discussion we had at scrutiny in relation to some of the issues. I've got a few questions. First of all, in relation to the Council's perspective on universal credit. I think it's really interesting how the Council's drawn together a partnership strategy, which I would welcome. I would actually be interested in the Council's view, or Councillor Forbes' view, on how smaller organisations might be engaged in that, because we know that smaller organisations at the community level can actually be very important. And I know sometimes the Council's partnership arrangements tend to be at a kind of higher level than that, if that's the right way of putting it. So I'd be interested in your view about that. I've also got a question about education. Quite rightly, you highlight the importance of raising educational attainment in the city. There's another issue, and that's about school places. A few years ago, the council said that it needed to commission 3,700 school places across the city. I'm just wondering what progress there might be on that. Another question I have is about partnerships. One of the biggest and most important partners for this council is actually the private sector, and yet we hear reports of how Labour councillors in the city centre, for ideological reasons, oppose working with businesses. I wondered whether the council has a view about that, and whether Councillor Forbes has a view about that. Is he going with those ideological considerations, or is he doing what's right for the city? And another point that I've got is around the mayoral system. There's a lot of decisions being made about the future of the mayoral system and how it might work out in the combined authority. What happens if a mayor comes along who's elected, who has a completely different agenda? What happens to all that work that's been undertaken? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cott. Councillor Driscoll.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The report opens talking about the particularly harsh financial conditions we face, with £283 million loss of funding as a result of political decisions made by central government since 2010. There's an increasing evidence base growing in recent years that a focus on local wealth building is a particularly successful way to combat these damaging austerity policies. It's good to see the report mentioning that we procure 45% of our spending with Newcastle-based organisations, and I think it says 67% in the North East. Figures from the Centre for Local Economic Studies show that small local firms generate 58% more benefit for local economies compared to large firms. Cooperatives in particular provide employment, increase the local tax base, and stop wealth leaking out via corporate headquarters into places like Panama and the Cayman Islands. Councillor Forbes and I are both Labour and Cooperative councillors. Would Councillor Forbes be supportive of Newcastle linking up with the Cooperative Councils Innovation Network to explore ways in which we could encourage the development of cooperatives in Newcastle and link up with other councils who are pursuing community wealth building strategies?
Thank you, Councillor Driscoll. Councillor Stone.
Questions for Councillor Forbes? Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Leader, for your report. And when talking about lengthy reports, you could mention perhaps to people that the Sermon on the Mount
the Ten Commandments and the Gettysburg Address were all less than 300 words, or what would fit on one side of paper. One of the first things you mentioned in your report is the boundaries review. Do you think that democracy is properly served by two city centre wards together, having as many voters as each of the Castle and Parklands wards, both of which have additional homes being built now? And while I very much join in the thanks to our staff, has he any concerns about the number of skilled and experienced officers who are leaving us? The government's crowing about the golden age that awaits the North East under the devolution deal. He knows from my previous comments that I welcome this deal, and despite the long time it's taken and the small scale. But would he echo the Minister, who seems to think that a few tens of millions of pounds will make a huge difference where the hundreds of millions of pounds we spend each year as a council don't? And while I'm pleased that Newcastle's voice has been heard in Brussels over Brexit, does he agree with me that it isn't being heard in London, where the actions of Leaver fanatics and the interests of the split Conservative Party trump our jobs, investment and well-being?
Thank you, Councillor Ashby. Councillor Higgins.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. Can I just say that, like Councillor Forbes, I was a bit wary about the photograph coming up on the screen, but I guess, can I reassure him with the thought that perhaps we get better with age, Nick? I won't invite comment on that. But can I just thank Councillor Forbes for his report again, and also for being such an effective champion and a voice on behalf of the city and the region, which he has been now for many, many years. He outlines in the report, of course, the challenges that we still face in terms of sustained austerity. And before I move to my question, can I remind Council about the part that the party opposite played in austerity, which has now led to the kind of challenges that we face in keeping our libraries open. Were it not for that process starting, we might not face those challenges. However, I'll move on to my question, Lord Mayor. Both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have now officially declared that austerity is over. Can I ask the Leader of the Council whether he has a view on that, and whether, to quote from, shall we say, a tune that brings back certain memories for me, in the future, things can only get better?
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. Councillor Forbes? Oh, sorry, just a moment. Forbes had been notified that there's another member of the Council who wishes to speak before you respond. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Two questions. Firstly, on page 168, you say that as we're looking at about the future, what the future holds for the Metro and what the expansions options are. And I just wondered what options are being looked at and what the timescale is. And as austerity has been mentioned, can I ask whether you support the 20 Labour members of Parliament who voted against the government on tax cuts for the rich, or the rest of the Labour MPs who shamefully voted with the government on tax cuts for the rich instead of spending that money on public services?
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm responsible for many things, but I'm not responsible for the Labour Party's policy on taxation. Not yet, anyway. And I would encourage Councillor Taylor. If she wants to look at the future of the Metro. There's a very good document called Metro Futures, which will set out all of the answers that she asks. If I could just run through the various members' points that were raised. Alistair's quite right. I met with Professor Alston, the UN rapporteur, today. We focused on in our conversation on the impact of universal credit on our city, but we also talked about the long-term impact of poverty, not just on the individual families that are affected by it, and not just on austerity and the impact of austerity on public services, but on the corrosive nature that both of those have on our society, and how that is leading, in my view, to increased tensions in some parts of our city and fewer public sector resources in order to be able to manage different conflicts where we see them beginning to emerge. And I think that's a hugely regrettable position. I think that part of the social contract that was established in this country in the post-war period was a level of universal service provision that people paid into a system according to their ability to pay and received back what they needed according to their needs. And it's a great regret to me and to many in my party that those very sound principles are being sorely eroded through austerity, and we see that most acutely in the benefit system today. Following on from that then, Councillor Cott raises the similar question about universal credit, and I can assure him that we do work with all organisations offering support. On the issue around school places, this is where we get into the nonsensical position that the council have a responsibility for providing school places, but not the ability to provide schools. And it's just absolutely crazy that the only new schools that can be provided in the city can either be free schools, studio schools, or academies that are beyond the council's control. We have no say in where they might be established, and that is simply nonsensical. And I'm very pleased. I don't recognise what he said about business in the city centre. We've just had the revalidation vote for NE1, the Business Improvement District, the highest vote ever in terms of its revalidation. And that is a huge vote of confidence from businesses in the city centre. And I'm immensely pleased that they have another 5-year term to continue and develop the amazing work that they do. And I know that work is fully supported by members right across this chamber. And on the issue that he raises about the mayoralty and the combined authority, the clue is in the name. It's a combined authority. And if you read the governance documents, which will be published tomorrow, it's very clear that it's a collective approach, and that much of the decision-making is either subject to majority voting of 2/3 of the cabinet or unanimous voting for the cabinet. So actually, the mayor is not an executive mayor in the same way as that local authority mayors are executive mayors. This mayor is entirely embedded within the structure and is entirely accountable to the 3 local authorities. Can I say to Jamie, thank you for the question about the Council Innovation Network. I was actually a founder member of the network. We founded it back in 2013 with Ed Miliband. We launched it in Rochdale Town Hall. And he's quite right in saying that small local firms generate more benefit for the local economy than some of the larger companies that we see, which is why I'm particularly pleased by the amount of procurement spend that's spent in the city and the region. Very high figures indeed. But we don't just count the amount of money that we spend in the local economy. We actively work to encourage SMEs to register for procurement opportunities in the city. And that's one of the ways in which we help to ensure that money stays within our local economy, by making sure that it's not just local spend with local organisations or organisations with a footprint in the city, but organisations that are actively encouraged to be part of our local economy so that we can keep the wealth in our local economy. And of course, we can always do more, and I'm very interested by the concept of community wealth building, which isn't just about following the money in the system, but I believe it's also about power, wealth and opportunity as well, being in the hands, to coin a phrase, in the many, not the few. And for the Boundary Commission proposals that Councillor Ashby commented on, of course, he knows perfectly well that the Boundary Commission proposals are to achieve electoral equality by 2021. So his question is a little bit mischievous. And of course, the Boundary Commission agreed that we should have diversity and representation within the city, right across the city, which is why they stuck with the current number of wards that we have. And Councillor Higgins' point around austerity, we heard the Prime Minister say that austerity was over. We heard the Chancellor say that austerity was going to be over soon. We are expecting a local government finance settlement in a few weeks' time, which will confirm that austerity is still here for local government. We're still expecting £1.3 billion of cuts to the local government sector. We know we still face a financial gap next year alone of £20 million, rising to £60 million over the next 3 years as a result of grant reductions and unfunded cost pressures. So if austerity is over for the few and not the many.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Does Council agree to receive the report? Thank you. Item 9B, Transport and Air Quality. I now call on Councillor Ainsley to introduce the report.
Mayor. I'm going to everyone has read the report and so won't go through it. Yes. Oh. Sorry. I'll just pick up some of the most important points, and air quality has to be one of those. It's the biggest threat to health, and we must improve air quality across the city and not just base our actions on the narrow guidance of this Tory government, who are only concerned with measuring nitrous dioxide on a couple of major roads. This would be fairly simple to achieve, and we would not be doing justice to the residents of the city, as it would simply move the problem from the central motorway and the coast road, which are two of the roads that the directive lists. Sorry, I'm losing my voice as well. And this would move the problem to more residential areas and quite often more deprived areas. Detailed modelling is currently taking place to make sure that whatever action we take, we will achieve the best possible outcome, and our proposals are expected to be submitted to DEFRA by the end of December. Obviously, we take this issue very seriously, unlike central government. It's going. It has happened. And have currently implemented some actions to improve air quality. Smart traffic signals, bus lanes, cycle lanes, and of course,
Have a drink.
the moss tree on Barras Bridge. We launched our air quality awareness raising campaign, and as part of that we held a transport forum last week, which was attended by approximately 50 people from business, transport providers, academics and representatives. Thank you. Everybody's wanting to give me water. Which was attended by about 50 people from business, transport providers, academics and representatives from the voluntary sector, NCVS, Elders Council, Disability Forum and Newcastle Vision Support, to name just a few. Everyone will be saying much more about the quality of the air that we breathe over the coming months. And obviously, given this information, the detailed information that I've just given on improving air quality, this determines just about everything that's being done about transport across the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Could I call on Councillor Lovett, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We can all name numerous locations across the city where road users are experiencing serious problems with congestion. At peak times, it can take more than an hour to complete a journey that should take 15 or 20 minutes. An example that we have in our ward is on Forden Lane and Belsay Gardens onto Kingston Park Road. On Forden Lane, we regularly see traffic backed up to the Forden Metro from the traffic lights on Kingston Park Road. Vehicles are generating emissions in close proximity to schools and residential housing. As far as I'm aware, these roads are not being monitored by emission sensors. Will Councillor Ainsley and the Council commit to reviewing the current gridlock we see at peak times on roads that intersect major routes across the city and speed up the release of vehicles on all the roads?
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. Councillor Durrant.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Could the Cabinet member please give some more information about the success or otherwise about the closures on Blackett Street?
Thank you. Councillor Wooddock.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Ainsley's report, however softly spoken it is tonight, it has a lot about the movement forward across the city, and it includes a sentence about the Hadricks Mill to Cowgate corridor. Does she not share a little nuance about the fact that all sections of that have been seriously delayed? She's been at Hadricks Mill more times than I have, and my sister lives just round the corner from there. So but in terms of, for example, at Blue House Roundabout, if she could maybe say what timescales there are for that to be implemented. We also need to know about what is being done in Gosforth and the High Street which is one of the worst pollution hotspots outside the city centre, and what's being done to actually alleviate that. One thing that could be done would be to do something with the High Street. That was supposed to have been actually resurfaced in July. It's still not been done. When will we see action?
Thank you, Councillor Woodard. Councillor John Paul Stevenson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Could the Cabinet member please explain why she thinks the government's approach to improving air quality is too narrow?
Thank you. Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. My commiserations to Arlene on the problems with the voice. She may want to get back to me at another time on this rather than here tonight, but I was going to make the point that on the air quality issue, it is usual from my study of the figures that the autumn and winter periods, when we've got cold, high-pressure evenings and little wind, is particularly bad for air quality concentrations to exceed the daily safe limits. And I was wondering if Councillor Ainsley could tell me tonight, or perhaps at a later time, how many times in the last year have Newcastle's major roads suffered air quality concentrations in excess of the safe daily limit?
Thank you, Councillor Stone. Councillor Higgins.
First of all, Lord Mayor, can I thank Councillor Ainsley for her report and for battling on so bravely. And in fact, what I've tried to do then is to phrase a question that will perhaps only require a one-word answer, just to save your voice. But the reality about air pollution, of course, is there are too many cars on the road. We can sort of put new surfaces on, we can rearrange things, but the reality is there are too many cars on the road. So at the moment, we're going through an extensive regeneration process in the Scotswood area, in the west end of the city. For some time now, I've expressed concerns about the public transport routes that lead into the city from the west end, and we see regular traffic jams all the way into the city, pumping out air pollution. So does Councillor Ainsley agree with me that as a priority in phase 2 of that regeneration, we look at more effective public transport into the city, including the possibility of the metro at some time in the foreseeable future? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Higgins. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We had quite a long discussion about Blackett Street at scrutiny, and I know it's very nice for residents and for businesses to have Blackett Street closed, but obviously there were concerns raised by the bus companies reported in the Chronicle recently, and I know that some disabled residents have also expressed quite a lot of concern about the extra distance they have to travel. So I'm just wondering how you plan in future to try and balance the conflicting needs of different parts of the community and try and get that improvement in air quality on Blackett Street that we all appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Huddart.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you to Councillor Ainsley for the report. There is no mention in your report of emissions from aircraft at the airport or of vessels on the Tyne. My understanding is that the emissions from motor vessels on water are the worst of all, and that in Holland now they require vessels to actually plug in to an electrical supply on the quayside as opposed to be churning out emissions. So I wonder if in future reports you can actually mention the contribution of the airport to emissions and what's happening there to reduce things, and also the equivalent of burger vans that sit with their motors running all the time, churning out emissions, if any action's been taken against those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Huddart. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I'll continue to speak for as long as my voice will allow me, and may have to respond, as Greg very kindly suggests, I may respond in writing via email, if that's okay with everyone. I'll try my best to take your point, Councillor Huddart, about the airport and boats, and I will ask officers to to register that, to monitor that in the future. Although, of course, we are part of the major port, but obviously the mouth of the Tyne gets the most of the bigger vessels, and the airport is in Northumberland. Councillor Higgins, I do agree that there are too many cars on the road, and I'll link that to Councillor Lovett, to a response for Councillor Lovett. There are too many cars on the road, it's as simple as that. We need to get more, we need more investment in public transport, including the metro.
Not the West End.
And, we need to keep the traffic free-flowing so that we don't get cars idling, stuck at traffic lights. And as such, we've introduced smart traffic signals at a lot of those junctions. And so we will continue to monitor the emissions where congestion is worst. But the important thing is to get people to change the way they travel and use public transport. And for that, we need major investment. Councillor Duran, Blackett Street was a huge success when it comes to the research we did with people who visited the street during the closures, and also local businesses saw a huge upturn in their takings. The businesses along, the retailers along that Blackett Street had marked improvements in their takings in the weekends where the street was closed. But I do accept, and we are looking and working with bus companies, Councillor Taylor, about the conflicting needs of looking to improve air quality on Blackett Street, looking to improve the retail, looking to invest in the economy, but we do recognise the conflicting needs, and we will be working with the public transport operators to mitigate those problems. Hadrick's Mill to Cowgate has been seriously delayed, and you didn't actually mention Killingworth Road, which has caused the huge number of delays that we've experienced. And that was mainly because of a catalogue of events that nobody could have predicted. Now that Northern Gas Networks have actually cleared the site as of last week, and our workforce are now on site carrying out the road widening that's needed, that will then lend itself to the other developments that you've mentioned, Blue House Roundabout up to Cowgate, and Gosforth High Street is subject to clean air zone, and I will certainly investigate why the resurfacing hasn't started yet. Councillor Stevenson, the government's approach is too narrow. They've only just decided to challenge local authorities and have completely pushed the book to local authorities on air quality since they were challenged by Client Earth and lost that legal challenge. And of course, they only are measuring and monitoring the nitrous dioxide that I mentioned earlier, and not the huge gambit of emissions and particulates. And of course, typical in these days of austerity, there is no funding for us to do any of the work that's needed to combat and to improve air quality. I think Councillor Stone, I'll get back to you as you suggest about the autumn-winter. And I think I've covered everything, and if I haven't, I will check my notes and get back to everyone. And in summary, I think we owe it to our residents to improve air quality. There are almost 400 premature deaths per year in this area, in Newcastle, North Tyneside and Gateshead, that can be attributed to poor air quality. The figure nationally is 400,000. Obviously, to do nothing is not an option. We must take action, and that includes a modal shift in the way we get about. We need to make the transport choices our healthy choices. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you for soldiering on. We do hope that you'll recover quickly. Does Council agree to receive the report? Item 9C, Environment. I now call on Councillor Kemp to introduce the report.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I bring this Cabinet report to the City Council first as Cabinet Member for Environment, although the title is perhaps a little deceiving because it incorporates the whole of regulatory services as well. The aim of my portfolio is clear: to make Newcastle a clean, green and fair city. I think we're leading the way with steps such as the Waste Commission, the establishment of the Newcastle Resource Partnership, the establishment of a Food Waste Partnership, and through the exemplary work of our regulatory services who fly the flag for this City Council, where we continue to deliver an enviable record of successful prosecutions, second only to London in the UK. We're an ambitious council and aim to be one of the greenest cities in the UK through the encouragement of lifestyle changes at home and through the use and interventions of new technologies and ways of working that benefit both the public and private sectors. We're showing our leadership role by our response to the recommendations of the Waste Commission through the removal of single-use plastics across the City Council estate, introducing compostable coffee cups and removing plastic straws. We're also getting a great deal of leverage from the business community in following that route. We've implemented significant technologies across the service, introducing bin sensors in all the city bins to make the service more efficient and manage the waste more effectively. We're working with local groups, for example Green in Wingrove, to address the continued issue of bin contamination, and we are beginning to see positive results. We are reviewing the household waste recycling centres and looking to introduce reuse facilities in these, and we're also introducing resident parking schemes, in which it means that benefit will resist for the... excuse me, put my teeth back in. So the permit schemes will enable the service be available for residents and council taxpayers rather than those who have been taking advantage of the service further afield, meaning that we're actually paying the weight of their rubbish. We've revised our city tree strategy to ensure that our increased tree canopy cover and we have the right tree planting policy in place as our city continues to grow. Our first-class services are delivered by our first-class staff. This is in spite of the climate of an ongoing government of austerity. We have fewer funds to deliver clean streets, to collect our household waste, and we cannot nor should not hide away from the significant challenges we face. The achievements outlined in this report illustrate the hard work, commitment and innovation of the staff and the residents of this great city, and I take this opportunity to publicly thank them. We had a full and robust discussion at scrutiny and a great variety of questions asked and addressed. Lord Mayor, I'm happy to take any fresh questions and will also respond to any emails.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Call on Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. One thing that I've been very interested in is the rate at which municipal waste is being sent to landfill. The Council's figures actually show a significant reduction, which I welcome in broad terms. But let's be realistic. Recycling rates, by the Council's own count, are static. Landfill reduction is a direct result of more waste being euphemistically recovered, a clever word which means incineration in the vast majority of cases, whatever the residual benefit. Across the city, we're constantly seeing missing caddies, absent lids on bins. We're talking glass being mixed with paper, blue bins being used for general waste, recycling constantly being consigned. And it doesn't seem that this problem is recognised at all. We're told... There will be a question. We're told the waste disposal contractor is being encouraged to look at alternatives to incineration. But we
Thank you for the
also
reminders.
suggestion.
Sorry, Councillor Ferguson. I'm grateful for the reminder from the other side of the chamber. Please come to your question.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Is it realistic to expect a greater proportion of the city's waste to be recycled or reused in this context? And given the high likelihood that we'll just recover more waste, I'd be curious to know if, in the process of developing the waste strategy, the Cabinet Member has required any assessment of the environmental impact of incinerating currently a third of municipal waste and what that impact is. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Ali.
Thank
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would like to ask you, Nick, you referenced the plans to extend the selective licensing area. Can you please comment on the success of existing schemes and how they will be measured?
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In your report, Nick, you mentioned that the target is for 100% green energy by 2050 and 50% by 2030. I was wondering if you could let me know how many recent planning applications have involved in proposals for renewable energy, and how you propose to increase this and reach the targets that we're talking about.
Thank you. Councillor Byrne.
Councillor Kemp's report outlines the Council's initial response to the Waste Commission. Can he tell us more about what he thinks the next steps will be? And contrary to those alarming reports received by Councillor Cott, as a city centre councillor, I'd be particularly interested in how he thinks we can work with the private sector to meet our obligations.
Thank you. Councillor Lovett.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I had a question first about the report. I wanted a little bit of clarification. On page 3 of the report, right at the bottom, it says that household waste and recycling centres had more than 450,000 last year, but I'm not quite sure what 450,000 was. Is that... Yeah. Secondly, many residents were distressed by the 100% increase in the brown bin charges last year, or this financial year. Many elderly residents on a pension were concerned and upset that they would not be able to afford a brown bin in future. Council has struggled to encourage the uptake of the subscriptions this financial year. Residents in my ward and others asked if they could spread the charge across the year.
Can you come to the question again then, please, Councillor Lovett? Thank you.
They were informed that they needed to pay the whole lump sum. In the coming financial year, will Councillor Kemp and the Council consider allowing residents to pay monthly for their brown bin? This may encourage an increase in subscriptions and therefore an increase of revenue, so mitigating further increases in the brown bin charges.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Yes, my question is, regulatory services continue to deliver an impressive service. Can the Cabinet Member please comment as to what more can be done to promote the success of this activity and the benefit it brings?
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can I suggest that Councillor Ferguson's stream of consciousness gets digested into an email, and I will attempt to address some of the general meandering. The one point I think you raised, well, I don't actually know, so I'm sorry. It was a stream of consciousness, so I apologise. Not being rude, but if you can structure some serious questions, I'll send them out and I'll circulate it to the whole council. Councillor Ali, selective licensing. Yes, there are the proposals to roll out across the whole of the city. We currently have 2 locations in the city, one in High Cross and one in Byker Old Town. They've been incredibly successful to a point, although they are only one particular element of intervention in dealing with issues of poor landlords, antisocial behaviour and depressed communities. But what we have seen is a great success, and some statistics are we've seen over a 70% rise in satisfaction of residents and private landlords and private tenants in the 2 areas in current activity. They are monitored and evaluated on an annual basis. As far as the progress going forward, the intention is that there's continuous engagement. There will be discussions with the ward members in the areas which are being identified to roll out the process. To date, we've seen over 50% take-up of new licensees in the 2 areas. So I would say at this moment it's very positive, but again I'm happy, and I raised some of the answers when I addressed a question similar at scrutiny, and I'm quite happy to send a full update to all members on the specific and the actual details. Councillor Taylor, green energy, yes, I agree. It's something that needs to be embedded into the planning process. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you specifically on the planning applications, as I'm sure you would appreciate, but I will inquire and get that distributed as well. Councillor Byrne, on the Waste Commission, I think we've made significant progress. One of the issues, sorry, Councillor Ferguson, it was the issue in the Commission was looking at the consideration of incineration, so I will pick up that in this point. The purpose of having the Waste Commission was really to have an independent and a kind of helicopter view of looking at waste and the manner of which we might deal with waste as a city on whole, rather than it simply belonging as a responsibility of the City Council. So I think that we are seeing progress. I think what we had to do was make sure that the activities of ourselves as a City Council and a kind of civic leader were put in place first. So we've made those interventions. We've seen quite a significant number of public houses and other leisure facilities leading the ban of plastic straws. We are having a significant activity in the Ousburn Valley. I will declare an interest. My office is directly in there, but I've managed to encourage a great number of the operators there to be in a point where it will be a plastic-free valley. I would like to see where next steps will be looking at being a single-use plastic-free city. I think that must be an ambition for this council, and equally a zero food waste city council. And that's one of the discussions we're having at a food waste partnership meeting this afternoon. We've had some very positive contributions from stakeholders, including some of the national corporates. So I think where I'd like to see is that we do actually have a leadership and a national perspective for dealing with waste, and particularly some of the smaller elements. As I say, the single-use plastics and the food, I think we could take a national leadership role here. Councillor Laverick, on the brown bins, I've answered the point on the tonnes issue, and thank you for pointing out that typo. With regards to the hitting the target and people being affected, yes, it was a difficult decision, as any budget increase is going to be, but it was a budget decision that was taken by the full council and was supported by the full council. Ultimately, I don't think we can say it wasn't, because you didn't vote against that as an individual item. No, I won't. Come on, Nick. So what I will say is, despite the scaremongering of opposition members, the target that was identified in the budget has been exceeded. So despite the reservation and the difficulties and the challenge it has been, I think we've put out a very good campaign. The communication from the officers involved has been incredibly good. It's been robust, it's been constructive, and as I say, we've seen an increase in the uptake of brown bin use. So the idea that it's something that really is an awful plan, obviously a budget increase is always going to be difficult, but I think what it would help to do is get behind the service, support the service to make sure that it is sustainable. The idea of monthly payments, we have discussed it in the past, but there are huge financial implications with it on the collection costs. So we will review, and we'll continue to review this year, how we administer the process of financial collection of the payments. But it's not that straightforward, because some of the people who pay do not actually have direct debit access, etc. So it's about making the process simple, straightforward, but the numbers we've achieved exceed what we actually set out to do. Councillor Williams, regulatory services, yes, it's a service that I think the whole of the city should be incredibly proud of. It runs across a variety of areas of activity of the City Council, where we do see that the real headlines are the issues around vehicle capture through illegal trading, where we're seeing fly tipping. We've had quite a number of very successful seizures of illegal tobacco, etc. But there's much more to be done, and ultimately it's like water, it will continue to flow. I think what we need to do is ensure that the information regards any of the activities are circulated and distributed, and I agreed this at scrutiny, that ward members should be made aware on a monthly basis, if possible, on the activities of the regulatory services where positive actions are taken. Then local members can actually distribute that information, disseminate it around, and ensure that the good activities of ourselves and our fellow partners involved in this, the police, customs and excise, can be recognised and promoted. And again, and I would also hope that the press would also choose to pick up on some of the very good work of the City Council rather than necessarily some of the greater challenges. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Camp. Does Council agree to receive the Environmental and Regulatory Services report? Item number 10, appointments. They were with you when you went to your seat. Does Council agree the appointments as... Okay.
Lord Mayor, can I ask if we can add Councillor Dan Greenhoff as a substitute member for the Joint Transport Committee Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and sorry about the long title for that. And Lord Mayor, just to apologise to the party opposite, we were asked for these nominations only yesterday, so I'm really sorry that it's being brought to Council tonight without time to discuss fully with groups. Thank you.
Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I can confirm that we have received late notification on that. I'm grateful for the apology. We are happy to take up the places on the basis that Councillor Lowe will be the lead opposition member on the two relevant committees, and I'll be the substitute member. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Okay. Thank you then. Is that now agreed? Thank you. Now move on.
Lord
Just a moment. Sorry. Do apologise. Apparently there's also a need for a substitute member.
Sorry, to clarify, yes, Councillor Lowe will be the lead member for the two. I think there is there's a joint transport committee and the joint audit committee. Councillor Lowe will be the lead member, and I will be the substitute member for both of those.
Thank you for that. Okay, item number 11, notice of motion. End period poverty. I call on Councillor Penny Evans to move this motion, deferred from the last meeting, and to be seconded by Councillor McGuinness.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I cannot believe that in 2018 we have women missing work and young women missing school because they can't afford sanitary protection. It's shameful that last year over 137,000 women missed school across the UK, disrupting their education. Regular absence from education can reduce the life chances of these young women. A survey by the children's charity Plan International UK found that 1 in 10 young women aged 14 to 21 in Britain could not afford sanitary towels or tampons, and furthermore, 1 in 5 has struggled to afford sanitary wear, while 1 in 7 had to borrow products from friends. 12% of young women have had some point been forced to improvise with socks, toilet paper, napkins and even newspaper, putting their health at risk. Welfare reforms and the rollout of universal credit has increased the use of food banks across the city. Food banks also provide essential non-food items to people in crisis, helping them maintain dignity and feel human again, including feminine hygiene products. Austerity has disproportionately impacted on women. 86% of the burden of austerity since 2010 has fallen on women. Period poverty is a reality, which is forcing many women to choose between putting food on their table or buying sanitary products. It's often those families hard hit on low incomes that struggle to afford these products. Access to sanitary products should be a basic human right. Periods affect half of the world's population, and the price of people who can't afford sanitary products is high, affecting their confidence and even their health. Periods are not a choice. Sanitary products are not luxury items. They allow women to control and manage their menstruation, but come at an expensive monthly cost. Over a woman's lifetime, sanitary products can cost more than £5,000, with women spending up to an average of £15 a month. Costs increase in households where there are more young women of menstruation age. Inability to afford sanitary products can have a major impact on women and girls' physical, mental well-being and confidence. Raising awareness on this issue is important for many reasons. As the subject of periods are still a taboo with stigma surrounding them, nearly half the girls aged 14 to 21 in the UK admitted to being embarrassed about periods. We need to help break down the stigma and the barriers that stop young women asking for support. The Red Box Project is an initiative that ensures that no young woman misses out on her education because of her period. Community-driven and run by individuals across the UK, they place constantly stocked red boxes of sanitary ware in schools for young women to access, aiming to reach those who may not be able to afford these vital items. The project uses donations from local communities to keep the boxes filled with period products and spare underwear. There are copies of the Newcastle Red Box Project leaflet outside the chamber for those people who are interested. The Labour Party has committed to ending period poverty by handing out free sanitary products in schools, food banks and homeless shelters in the future. The Labour Party has also pledged to provide free products so that female students need not miss out on the education they deserve. Period poverty is a national shame in a wealthy country in the 21st century. I believe in Newcastle that no woman should be forced to miss work and no young woman be forced to miss school or college because of their periods. I therefore call on all members across the chamber to support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor McGuinness.
So I'd like to second the motion wholeheartedly. Period poverty, even the name, even the words are shocking in this day and age. I agree wholeheartedly with everything Councillor Penny Evans has to say. The Red Box Project is to be applauded, as are the thousands of food banks who are providing for these women each month. And in this day and age, it is an absolute disgrace that women and girls miss work and school because they have a period. I could say an awful lot about this issue, but in the interest of time, and because I think we've all heard enough from me tonight, I just want to add one thing. Imagine the impact on the mental health of women and girls. Imagine how it feels to miss school or work because of something that happens every month, something that isn't a choice, something that isn't an illness, something that's a fact of life. Imagine it being a girl and being bullied, having to borrow and improvise with sanitary products because you can't afford it month after month. In fact, The Independent says that women experiencing period poverty are 39% more likely to have anxiety or depression. This is a problem that women and girls have told the government about. The Girl Guides, all of the women's magazines, Always, The Guardian, Red Box, Food Banks, schools, us, councils, are all telling the government there is a problem and we aren't getting a solution. I hate to say it, but this so often seems to be the issue when something disproportionately affects women. So why should we be surprised when it's something that exclusively affects women? Just think about the WASPI campaign or universal credit. So to the Secretary of State, you're raising the tax, we want you to spend it on these women. In Newcastle, we're better than this and we'll do what we can to alleviate the problem here, but we need a much bigger solution.
Thank you very much. Councillor Casey, you've asked to speak.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I was very lucky in that my mum discussed periods and puberty with me from an early age. So when I got my first period at the age of about 11, I knew what it was, and I was able to talk about it with friends and adults. Mum was determined to do a better job than her mum, who had sent her to a neighbour the first time she started bleeding because she couldn't talk about it with her own daughter. Unfortunately, some families still find this a difficult conversation, and Plan UK has found that about 10% of children have been asked not to talk about periods with one or both of their parents. Consider then that around 60% of children under 15 in Newcastle are among the most deprived in England, meaning that they and their families face appalling choices on how to spend limited budgets. This situation is only getting worse, with the introduction of universal credit and the defunding by successive Conservative governments, including the coalition, of many initiatives which would previously have supported children and their families. Given that this is Youth Work Week, it would be remiss not to mention pressures on many excellent youth projects around the city caused by increased need and decreased funding. There has also been a real terms decrease in the funding schools receive per pupil, in spite of the Chancellor's pitiful offer to schools in the budget. Many schools in Newcastle keep spare tampons and pads on hand for pupils, but acknowledging the stigma that persists around both periods and poverty, we need to ensure that every child and young person knows that pads and tampons are available, and feels confident that they won't be asked awkward questions about why they need them and why they can't buy their own. Children and young people having easy access to essential sexual health supplies like tampons and pads would fulfill an obligation on us as a UNICEF child-friendly city, as well as helping to ensure that all children can benefit from full attendance at school and involvement in sport. It is also something our Youth Council has raised as an issue they would like progress on. As portfolio holder for children education and skills and chair of the Child Friendly City Board, I have started this conversation with schools, and I would be happy to update Council in due course. However, I hope that the government would look to the example being set in Scotland and put this on a statutory footing with the funding attached to make it a reality, as well as undoing their regressive policies which are massively contributing to period poverty in the first place. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Huddard.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm delighted to speak in support of this motion, which outlines a very real problem. As mentioned, some 1 in 10 young women are unable to afford period products as a consequence of low income. Also, we read that about 138,000 girls missed school last year because of lack of access to sanitary products. And if you are female, you cannot opt out from having periods, even if you wanted to. It's something that will affect you from being a teenager until you're at least 40, sometimes 50. And it's a common problem in third world countries too. You know, people have to go and sit in a mud hut for a week because they're considered unclean or something. It's absolutely dreadful. However, the fact that we're now recognising period poverty is something that we can tackle here. Fortunately, it is becoming better known, and there are many women's organisations, schools, charities, etc., as well as food banks, who've set up schemes to collect and distribute products. The Scottish Government's promising schemes to provide free products in schools, and the Welsh Assembly apparently has also set aside for similar schemes. So in England, we are left behind, and it's something I hope we'll all be lobbying on to our local MPs so that they can ask for further legislation. The situation of VAT on sanitary products is still an embarrassment, really. I think the idea of us having a red box here as part of another box, I would suggest that we open a food bank collection in the front entrance of the Civic Centre, and that there's a red box in that, and that we can all, including the staff, etc., chip into that. And it could be collected 1 week by the West End Food Bank, 1 week by the East End Food Bank. I know my own collection, food bank collection in Sainsbury's in Heaton, where I go, now contains these products too. So very delighted to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Huddard. Councillor Schofield.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm again really pleased to speak in support of this motion. Women and girls, with respect to menstruation, are discriminated against in many ways that are largely invisible. E.g., the cost of basic sanitary products over a lifetime is around much more than £5,000. Many are also oppressed by the complete lack of understanding and special consideration given to them in their workplace, in schools, etc., when having their periods. They miss work, career opportunities and school, as we've heard. It is also one of the unspoken consequences of the Tory Lib Dem austerity programme. Period poverty mainly affects women and girls living on and below the poverty line and those who are homeless. Women in prison, police custody also suffer appallingly from the punitive, inadequate access to sanitary products. This is an attack on their health and safety. It is also a potential breach of human rights and equality law. This must change. I hope that all members on all sides of the chamber will support the motion and further support campaigns to abolish the 5% VAT and commit to a universal system of free sanitary products. And finally, I'd just like to congratulate Councillor Penny Evans and all women, particularly young women, who have broken the dreadful silence on period poverty and also broken the age-old taboo against speaking about periods, so bringing the rights of women and girls to full and appropriate menstrual care to the political agenda for action. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So I recently attended a talk given by a young woman who attends a sixth form in Newcastle, and she spoke about period poverty. And she told us that there was a problem in her school in this city, and she asked the audience to do three things. So one is to get the issue out in the open, to lift the taboo, to talk about periods and to talk about period poverty. She asked us to provide help now to people who are affected by the problem, and she asked us to make better policy to promote equality and to promote period dignity in workplaces and across the city. So I want to read you some testimony from a young woman from the north of England recently about the issue. It's anonymous testimony about a problem that she suffered. I wrapped a sock around my underwear just to stop the bleeding because I didn't want to get shouted at. And I wrapped a whole tissue around my underwear just to keep my underwear dry until I got home. I once sellotape tissue to my underwear. I didn't know what else to do. I kept this secret until I was 14 years old, and then I started asking for help. I didn't get any money because my mum was a single parent and she had 5 mouths to feed, so there wasn't much left over. I didn't get any money. Sorry, that's the end of the quote. So periods, and really these days I think that poverty are a part of everyday life, and the shame should be reserved for people who stigmatise these and not for these young women. And I think men have a responsibility to speak up here and to do something. We don't want our neighbours, our friends, our sisters and our daughters to suffer this kind of indignity. I think it's about solidarity and about stepping up, particularly an issue for male-dominated groups like the opposition in this council, perhaps. So what I'd like to propose, or what I'd like to encourage everybody to do is, councillors, is to bring along donations to the Red Box at the next council meeting. I think the idea to give items to the East End and West End food banks is good, and I'd like to suggest the St Vincent de Paul project as well, which is an excellent project in my ward that gives services to people who need essential goods. I would like to say that I don't think that ignorance and shame are really matter. Well, shame is really a matter of ignorance. I think it's a matter of politics and political decisions and inequality. And I'm convinced that the ferocious attack on the welfare state launched by the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats in 2010 has massively impacted women and has promoted a culture of blame and shame and division in our society. And what we really need is national political change. But in the meantime, I think we should do what we can. We should donate what we can. And I'm pleased to support the motion.
Thank you very much. I call on Councillor Penny Evans to respond, please, to reply.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm pleased that everybody across the chamber is willing to support, and I hope that they support this motion. Thank you.
Does Council agree this motion? Thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Woodcock.
Suspension of Standing Order 19 to allow completion of the agenda tonight.
Is that agreed? Can I just ask, first of all, do you have a seconder for your...
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Taylor. Okay, then, can we vote on that then, please? The app, can you try that one again, please? pretty good going. Is everyone happy that they have voted? Yep, okay. We can just ask if he's for or against if you want. I'm afraid one vote is not enough, Jerry, to topple this, to turn it around. So that move is not agreed. Okay. Pardon? We go on to the next item, which is a notice of motion on housing. I call on Councillor Huddart to move the motion, seconded by Councillor King.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, for this opportunity to raise some current housing issues which affect not just our residents here in Newcastle, but are across local authorities across the land. And I have begun this by stating the obvious about everyone deserving to live in a decent, safe home. And if we look at the recent shifts in the balance of housing types in Newcastle, we can clearly see where the policies have exacerbated the problems that we have. I have not read anything now for years from any organisation, charities, housing lobby groups, academics, journalists, or anybody who has said anything other than we need to build more houses and that we need more social housing. And even though the government, who've previously been deaf to this, have now promised to build 300,000 properties per annum, I would go back to the suffragettes and say, they said deeds not words. We need action on this. The decision to sell off council housing as part of the right to buy arrangements in the Thatcher years, I didn't have a problem with people trying to own their own houses. What I did have a big problem with was the way it was enacted, the lack of the practical arrangements. And despite promises, a property sold did not generate funds for replacement on even a one-for-one basis, which is why we've now got the shortfall. And some authorities are asking for a 5-to-1 replacement. And last year, only 7,000 new social housing units were built. Our stock of social housing for rent has dropped, and we have insufficient funds which to build new. And the lack of social rented housing created a gap in the market which was rapidly filled by the private rented sector, which has escalated massively over the past decades. The other issue I have problem with is the government policies to encourage first-time buyers with Help to Buy have helped thousands of young people, but those schemes are not without fault. And we've seen problems when people have decided to sell them or move them on. The years of austerity have meant that young people haven't got the funds to buy new or even put down a deposit, and the Tory government has never understood that in many areas young people just cannot get mortgages because of the cost of deposits. In London it's 10 times the average wage, here it's 5 times, but that is often too much. And some low wage earners and people with uncertain incomes will never be able to afford to buy. But like all of us, they need the stability of somewhere decent to live. And that's why we need a decent, thriving, social rented sector. And we owe it to people like our key public sector workers to be able to offer them a choice of housing which will suit their needs, keep them working here and provide services for our citizens. One of the few areas we have been able to borrow for is to build has been the assisted or extra care market, which has been helpful in widening the offer that we have to this group of citizens. However, the Elders Council often remind us that not all senior citizens want to live in bungalows or old people's homes. And the answer is choice. If our city is to thrive and be a good place to live, to study, to bring up a family or grow old, our housing policies should reflect the need to cater for different age groups, invest in our communities, and provide a good choice to meet all income groups. We'll always be looking for this. And I do hope we've moved away from previous models which resulted in the building of large, endless council estates and large, endless private housing estates, which contributed to stigma. We need something which reflects a mixture of housing tenures and helps improve social mobility. Now, the proposals to build 3,000 in the Outer West present us with some opportunities to build in health promotion options such as walkability, cycle tracks, green spaces and play areas. One other concern I have is the growth of for-profit companies who are now setting up large blocks of flats aimed at young people, which doesn't help our low-income residents who need to rent to provide a family home. Our owner-occupier rates in Newcastle at 49% are far lower than the English average of 63%. So we need to be talking to developers about how we could increase more shared equity schemes which could help our residents put down a deposit. The other point I wanted to make, and I've got a red line, but I will just say that universal credit has not been helpful to this city. About 5,000 of our YHN tenants are on this, and if it wasn't for YHN supporting them in the time before they get the housing component of their benefit, it would be even more disastrous. And that has actually led to a deficit of over £1 million at YHN. But the staff there are doing an excellent job of supporting people on universal credit. And I think we all have to lobby our MPs for further action about this scheme. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor King.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I second this motion and reserve the right to speak.
We have received an amendment to Councillor Haddott's notice of motion. Can I call on Councillor McCarthy to move an amendment, seconded by Councillor Pearce?
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Can I thank Councillor Huddart for bringing this motion to City Council tonight, because we truly do have a housing crisis in the UK. But I think as a council we've got much to be proud of. Last year, for the first time in around about 30 years, we built more homes, around about 1,300, I think. And Jane Strether, our previous cabinet colleague who led on housing for some time, reported on that when she brought that report to council earlier this year. Lord Mayor, I've not altered any of the facts that Councillor Huddart has set out in her motion. She raises some important issues about young people, and we do, as a council, have to recognise that young people don't necessarily want the lifestyles that many of us enjoy here. They make different choices now, so therefore we've got to respond to the offers that respond to the needs that they express. They don't want necessarily to live in the suburbs, they want to be in the city, they don't necessarily want a car. So we've got to adapt our policies to make sure that we address that. Councillor Huddart raised a really important opportunity about the housing revenue account borrowing cap. And Lord Mayor, colleagues across the council chamber will know we've been asking for this for years. And all it does is allow us to borrow, so it increases our debt, but it does enable us to plan properly for the future. And of course, Lord Mayor, I think we are really proud of all of the work that we've done using the capital that we have access to build supported housing for those most vulnerable people in our communities, to maintain their independence, particularly for older people or adults with learning disabilities. And as Councillor Huddart recognises in this motion, I think in this council we're really, really proud of what we do on homelessness and what we have done for universal credit. From my perspective, it's just a pity the party opposite didn't recognise that when they implemented it, but that's by the by. Lord Mayor, so in terms of the resolutions that I've brought for Council to consider tonight, we clearly need to work in line with the devolution context, we've just agreed colleagues for that, and the Leader of Council announced that the first Cabinet meeting is tomorrow. So let's make sure that we reflect what we are doing in the devolved authority. The next action that we're including is about making sure we plan effectively. That's about giving considerable thought to what we want to do and how we want to use that resource once we're clear about once the cap has lifted. I've amended some of the aspects of Councillor Huddart's motion. The lobbying for 2 for 1 would only work if it was fully funded, and I don't perceive the government to be able to offer us that. So what we are calling for from this side of the council chamber is to make sure that we can retain the whole capital receipt from right to buy. At the moment, we only get a proportion of that. Lord Mayor, in the 4th bullet point, I'm really, really sorry. I think in our trying to, with our new system, we try and use amendments to make sure that you can see what we've amended from the original motion, and it's left in a random shared equity provision, and I'm really sorry. Can we delete that? So I think the next bullet point is about working with developers to make sure that the changing needs and aspirations of older people, and I think the Elders Council would be part of that debate, to make sure that developers bring those opportunities forward in new development schemes. And of course, very importantly, as part of that, our plan includes the need to incorporate green space. Lord Mayor, Councillor Kemp tonight referred to the selective licensing, so I won't repeat that. It would be really helpful, those of us in wards representing residents who live in the private rented sector, please encourage as much response to that consultation as possible. It's really important that we get it right. On extending council tax levy, we have implemented changes to the council tax scheme that already puts pressure on homes that are empty. To be honest, I thought 500% was a bit excessive, particularly when some of the people this would affect. For example, if someone died and the family had to go through probate, that might be a problem for that individual family, because sometimes probate takes many, many months, and therefore it would be ridiculous to actually, it feels a bit over the top to charge them 500% in relation to that. And Lord Mayor, we will continue to do, this council is exemplary in what we do around universal credit. I think it's really interesting that Professor Philip Alston from the United Nations, one of the rapporteurs, has been here today to talk to us, as the Leader of Council has said. And just to recognise the hard work of officers of this authority, as a council, we regularly submit evidence to select committees, and our work is valued. Nationally, we're recognised as a council who is trying its best in these very, very difficult times. And indeed, I believe that some of the changes to universal credit, for instance, the reduction of the 6 weeks to 5 weeks, is as a consequence of the evidence that we have offered. Lord Mayor, just as a final comment, I do wish the colleagues opposite would read some of the reports that are taken to Cabinet, because it would help them in devising a motion that fit more readily with Council's policy. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Now, the guillotine has fallen. I'll call on one further speaker, seconder Councillor Pearce, if I may. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I second the amendment by Councillor McCarthy. I'm still waiting on the National Government to ban letting agent fees, announced by Chancellor Philip Hammond in November 2016, 2 years ago. I researched it, don't worry, I know that. But over in one in 5 Newcastle residents live in private rented housing and desperately need this change in law. Generation Rent has reported that average fee paid by 2 tenants at the start of a tenancy is £440, with fees ranging up to £813. This means that residents in Newcastle have lost, on average, £808 over the last 2 years, just due to national government's inability to actually follow through with their promises. So what must the council then do in response to this action? Our shared ownership and affordable homes programme was the largest municipal allocation in the region and delivers 449 specialist and affordable homes. We've long campaigned as a council for demanding a lifting of the cap of borrowing and on spending. We can deliver more social housing laws, but we need to do more. With right to buy, after council housing stock is sold with a discount, the national government receives 31% of the receipt from sale. For the first 2 quarters of this year, Newcastle City Council reported right to buy sales of 90 houses worth £4.1 million. From this, the council kept £2.8 million, but £1.3 million then went to the government. How can the government expect us then to replace like-to-like housing when they take a slice from the top? The Labour Party seeks sustainable right-to-buy schemes but we need national lobbying for councils to receive the whole capital receipt from national government in order to do this. Regarding the private sector in Newcastle, currently, eShelter reports that poor housing conditions exacerbate some of the most common health conditions and increase risk of severe ill health up to 25% during childhood and early adulthood. There are residents in the city right now scared of contacting anyone due to the fear of eviction. Rogue landlords thrive on this fear. Cases Renters Union Acorn have encountered include a tenant going to hospital with carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty boiler, a tenant so much mould in their house that they received a doctor's note given to the landlord who ignored it then, the landlord turning off the gas and electricity because he wanted tenants to leave, threatening them physically, breaking in their windows, a child of 2 living in a leaky roof in their bedroom, landlords still ignoring it, landlords offering single women discounts on rent in exchange for sexual acts. To conclude, Lord Mayor, this Labour administration is getting tough on rogue landlords, but we need selective licensing in order to have a proactive approach in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. And would that be your maiden speech this evening? Yes? Councillor King reserved the right to speak on the original motion. Councillor King.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Hi, I'm Aidan King of the Castle Ward. But what is the Dirty Rascal? This year I had the privilege of completing my self-built house in Castle Ward. I was helped to do this by my next-door neighbours, and the sense of community and belonging I gained from this are incomparable to other homes I have lived in. We're all aware that our housing market is broken, low on innovation, low on technological adoption, and leaving a whole generation of young people living in the second smallest homes in Europe. Self-building could help with all of these inequalities. There was one similarity in my neighbours' houses, and that was that they all spent more money on insulation than was necessary from British standards. The fact is that only the person who will pay the energy bills has any incentive to spend money on insulation. This administration's self-build policy lacks accessibility. This administration's self-build policy lacks imagination. This administration's self-build policy lacks innovation. This administration's self-build policy can best be described as elitist. This administration's self-build policy is the Dirty Rascal.
Thank you, Councillor King. And would that be your maiden speech as well? Okay. Can I now call on Councillor Huddard with the right to reply, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you for the contributions, and thank you for Councillor McCarthy for your contributions, particularly about removal of the borrowing cap, because I didn't have time to get round to that. And thank you for Councillor Pearce for talking about the iniquities of the private rented sector You may not be aware that I first started lobbying about dodgy landlords in 1992 and have continued to do that in the Jesmond and Heaton areas. And I could quote you lists of statistics about the poor energy and so on and so forth, because I have represented some of these people who live in some of these shabby houses for some length of time, and to say that every concession we got about improving the standards, particularly of HMOs and in the private rented sector, has done at the expense of my teeth. I could have pulled my teeth out quicker and easier than getting some concessions about improving the situation of private landlords. And in this city, like others, the majority of landlords own only 1 or 2 properties. It's not the big landlords that we particularly have a problem with. However, thank you for all for your contributions, and thank you for the amendments, which we're happy to accept if the Lord Mayor will take that as the substantive motion.
Okay. 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 Are we all agreed with the amendment? Thank you very much. I do apologise that I have omitted to draw Councillor's attention to Councillor Chisholm's speech. That was his maiden speech as well. So we move on to the remaining business. I would like to ask Councillor Middleton whether you would like to take this motion without debate. Okay. All right. Could I then ask for the seconder for the Councillor Kirdor for moving the...
Seconded, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. Does Council agree that with this motion? Thank you very much. Number 14, Breaking Point campaign. Councillor Greenhoff, do you agree to...
Yeah, move tonight, Lord Mayor.
Move, okay. And seconded by Councillor Driscoll? Seconded. Thank you. Does Council agree with this? Oh, sorry. I do apologise. Yep. Councillor Taylor, you wish to move an amendment? Sorry.
Yeah, move amendment.
And Councillor Stone? Just... Thank you. Okay. Is the amendment agreed? Okay. Huh? Yeah. Can we then move on to the new voting system once again? So this is the amendment. This is on the amendment, of course. Okay. Is everyone clear that they have voted and see it on there? Okay. So the amendment is not carried. So we go to the original motion. Is that agreed? Okay, thank you. Now, our next meeting is on January the 9th next year. So, as there's no meeting in December, it may seem premature doing it now, but I wish you all a happy Christmas. It's not too soon, because tomorrow I, with Stephen and Karen, Metro Radio are switching on the Christmas lights tomorrow. So, pardon? And you, okay, Councillor Kilgun as well. Councillor McGuinness, okay. I hear that we may be invited to do things on the stage, Councillor McGuinness, different dancing and other things. So this is for Metro Radio listeners, of course. So anyway, wish you all a happy Christmas and look forward to seeing you again in the new year at a council meeting and if not before here in the Civic Centre for other business. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much in the public gallery.